New food security report finds hundreds of thousands of Gazans are going days without anything to eat, and that cases of child malnutrition in Gaza have tripled in the past 6 months. Humanitarian workers are urging Israel to lift its restrictions on groups bringing food and medical supplies into that region. And joining us now, Joe English, Emergency Communications Specialist for UNICEF. Joe, thank you for being here. I'm reminding everyone that UNICEF focuses on protecting and caring for children, specifically across the globe. Can you tell us what life looks like for children in Gaza right now?
Yeah, good to be with you, Jessica. I mean, it's really hard to describe at this point because we have been warning for so many months about how catastrophic the situation has become. And we've been warning of this threat of famine, and all of the signs have been there, especially over the last few weeks and months. We've seen, children too emaciated to even be able to feed or drink or cry. We've seen parents turning up at our clinics with nothing to give their children. We've seen these images, all of us have seen these images of children wasting away. And so on Friday, we had this confirmation. We had this classification that Gaza is now experiencing a famine. And what we know is that once this happens, it is already too late for far, far too many children.
Also this week, the IDF told medical officials and aid organizations to prepare for mass evacuations from Gaza City. And I'm curious what this means for the children who are in the hospitals there.
Yeah, Gaza City is where this famine was classified, and so the idea of an escalation in military activity in a place which is experiencing a famine is unconscionable. These children, many of them, and their parents as well, it's not just the children who are malnourished, it's parents, it's grandparents, it's entire families sometimes. They are the most vulnerable. And so the idea that they can pack up what's little is left of their lives, many of them have been displaced multiple times already, and go to somewhere like Al-Mawasi where they're being told to evacuate to, where there are barely any services regardless. It is not possible. Imagine being a mother of a child who is malnourished. Imagine being a mother who has lost your husband and you have 3 or 4 children to feed, and now you're being told to leave the one place where you don't have safety, but at least you have a sense of stability. It's impossible.
And you and I have spoken a number of times during this war. Help people understand, you just noted the report that we got this week, but help people understand how the current situation for the children there in Gaza compares to other times in this conflict. Just give us some context here.
Yeah, I've been speaking with my colleagues in Gaza, many of whom are Palestinians themselves. They grew up in Gaza, they've lived in Gaza their whole lives, and the situation is worse than it has ever been. But not just that, I speak to colleagues of mine who have been doing humanitarian work around the world for many, many years, decades in some instances, and they say that this is as bad as anything they've ever seen. But the fact is that food, plentiful food, humanitarian supplies, drinking water, all of this is a matter of miles away. Often we see these kind of conditions hundreds and hundreds of miles away from support. But here it's a matter of, you could drive it in normal times in under an hour. That is the difference between life and death for these children. So we need to see the borders open. We need to see the entryways open up and let humanitarian aid in at scale. But we also need to see the situation on the ground in Gaza, within Gaza, allow us to do our jobs. And for that to happen, it has to be a ceasefire. All parties have to stop fighting.
And again, I believe when we've talked, you've said that the only way to fix the malnutrition, the starvation that some of these kids are facing is to just flood the zone with aid, because there is this concern if there's aid trickling in, that's when you get problem areas that we've seen a lot of we've seen people killed trying to get aid, trying to get to aid. It's about flooding the zone. Is that right?
It is. It's about removing that sense of desperation for families where when they see something, when they see aid coming in, they think it's the only chance that they're going to have to get any food for weeks. But it's not just that. For these children who have malnutrition, they require a specialized medical care, and I've seen this around the world. I've seen it in places like South Sudan. I've seen it in places like Syria. And when you see these children, malnourished children who are too weak even to cry often, but after a few days of this high energy peanut protein paste, you start to see the color come back into their cheeks. You start to see them start to cry and start to gurgle and start to, make all of those noises that babies should make. And it is honestly, it's like a miracle. I've seen it over a matter of days. It takes 6 weeks for this full course, but we have to be able to get to these children where they are, and we have to be able to give them this sustained course. And for that to happen, it has to be not just a pause here or there, within certain days, but it has to be a long-term ceasefire and ultimately an end to this conflict. But for all children, for children in Israel, in Gaza, in Palestine, we have to see an end to the fighting.
Yeah, and for these children who are suffering right now, what are the long-term effects medically of experiencing something like this as a baby or even as a 8 or 9-year-old?
Yeah, they're huge, so chronic malnutrition, both in terms of severe acute malnutrition, which is where you see children wasting away, but also just the lack of food over a long term, which leaves children short for their height. It has long-term implications for their development, for their future opportunities. But we also have to remind ourselves that this generation of children in Gaza have been out of school for the last 2 years as well. So any parent, what do you want for your kids? You want them to be happy, you want them to be healthy, you want them to be educated. And for too many children in Gaza, are they educated? No, they've missed 2 years of school. Are they healthy? No, disease is rampant, malnutrition is rampant. Are they happy? Every child in Gaza right now needs psychosocial support to deal with the traumatic experiences that they've had, and so no wonder parents are telling us, we're exhausted, enough, we need an end to the fighting.